a really intelligent, well-spoken man who happened to write terrific articles and was at the very top of the sport. So yes, he created a kind of revolution in bodybuilding, and that revolution still goes on today.
Well, guys, we're going to leave it there. We've got a few of Mike's old friends standing by to tell us about some of those great battles on stage, as well as his heavily debated training philosophies, and also about some of those more private battles that Mike had to fight during some of those more challenging years. Sean, thanks for giving our listeners some of that good insight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks.
All right. Sean Perrine, senior writer, Flex Magazine. The July issue of Flex is on newsstands this week. Check that out. Zach Kahn's on the cover. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break right here, but we're just getting started. When we return, we're going to visit with a couple Hall of Famers. Some of the greatest bodybuilders of all time are here to share a few of their own stories about the late, great Mike Mentzer. You can visit us online at bodybuildingradio.com. You're listening to a special tribute edition of Bodybuilding Talk Radio. We're back after the break.
You're listening to the Pro Body.
Right now, over at bodybuilding.com, Dan Solomon, Bob Cicherillo. We just heard from Flex senior writer Sean Perrine to help us lay some groundwork for tonight's show. We're calling it Remembering Mike Mentzer. Mike was born on November 15th, 1951 over in Pennsylvania. He served in the U.S. Air Force, and he passed away 5 months before he would reach his 50th birthday. And when famed bodybuilding historian Joe Rourke was asked to describe Mike Mentzer, Joe said, and I quote, "Mike Mentzer was one of the few muscleheads who could legitimately have applied for entrance into the Mensa Society." And for those of you who might not be familiar with Mensa, of course, Bob is intimately familiar. It's that very elite club reserved for the world's highest IQs. And what a perfect segue to our first guest. Let's say hello to one of our all-time favorites, Boyer Coe. Boyer, thanks for coming on.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, how you doing, Boyer?
Good, Bob. How are you?
We're honored to have you, and we're also honored to have our next guest. Boyer is not the only Hall of Famer here tonight. We're also going to bring in another one of the all-time greats. The original Giant Killer is here. Let's welcome Danny Padilla. Big Dan, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. What's going on?
Well, we're doing good, and I guess you guys have sat back and you've sort of listened to us get this thing warmed up. We're real excited to be able to, on some levels, celebrate the legacy and the memory of your old friend, Mike Mentzer. Danny, I'm going to begin with you, though. You and Mike, you guys were neighbors for about 3 years. Tell us a little about your personal relationship with Mike and some of the time that you and Mike spent together.
Well, Mike and I got pretty close because when he first came out to L.A., we were training at Gold's Gym when he first came in, and Joe Weider brought him in and said that this is going to be the next icon, in bodybuilding. And him and I met, we communicated, and we lived on the same street next door to each other. And he had come with this new concept, really to us it was old, because we had done the Nautilus system with my man in Florida, Arthur Jones, who was considered way out there. Very smart guy, but, outer space. But the reality is we had seen this concept before with Casey Viator because he was a powerful AAU champion who was under Arthur Jones's training. So what Mike did was brought this new concept, but with his own philosophical view on training and how to put it together. He was a very smart kid, and he was basically saying, why should we do 50 sets when we can do 2, 3 all-out sets and get the job done? And then Mike was more into saying that he understood that you had to have certain genetics to reach certain goals in your bodybuilding dreams, because if you didn't have the perfect genes, as he would say, you're very limited to what you can do. So that's the concept that he brought out. And then on top of that, you had to thank Joe Weider because he publicized it. So Mike became an icon, and he created it really was a revolution in bodybuilding.
Danny, as you stated, Casey Viator years before that, and actually was the catalyst for Mike Mentzer working on the heavy-duty system and all that. But why didn't it catch on with most of you guys? As you and I go back many years, I've heard a lot of your old stories. Most of it was all volume training, even though you guys all were privy to Arthur Jones, that system of training. So why did it work for Mike, but not for you guys?
See, because when we first were approached with this training, Arthur Jones would make everybody puke. Okay, he would make you take, let's say, a leg press, 1,000 pounds. You had to do as many reps as you could do. then you ran over without stopping, and you did a squat, let's say 315 for as many reps as you can get, 15, 20, and then you finished out with leg extensions. And it was such a hard workout that basically at the time we're trying to promote, bodybuilding, and we figured it would scare a lot of people out of the gym, and you know what? At that time it did. But Mike brought a different approach. He basically trained very hard, but he toned it down where he was in more control and not as overwhelming as Arthur Jones was.
Boyer, I want to go to you now. In advance of this show, I spoke to various people. I asked the question, if I were to do a show about Mike Mentzer, who should I include in the program? And everyone said right away that I must get Boyer Coe on this show, that you and Mike were extremely close. So let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Mike and sort of what brought you guys together.
Well, actually, the first time that I recall meeting Mike was at the 1977 Mr. Universe contest over in Nimes, France. And I think, if I remember correctly, that was also the first time that I met Danny as well. And that's, for some reason, Mike knew that Casey Viator and I were longtime friends. And Mike was influenced a lot by Casey because I think they had competed at one time in a Teenage Mr. America, and he was really impressed with Casey's development and the way that that Casey was training. And I totally agree with Danny that the reason that Arthur didn't catch on, Arthur was, first and foremost, even more than training, he was probably the greatest promoter that ever lived. It didn't matter what it was. People don't realize I've known Arthur Jones since I was 9 years old, long before he ever thought about fitness. At the time I first met him, he had a reptile farm down in Slidell, Louisiana, but that's another story. But then that same year in '77, Mike was over in France, competed in the Universe, and I think Cal Scalak beat him. And I thought for sure that Mike was going to win because he had a much better overall physique. But Cal won, and then naturally in '78 he went on, I think, to get the first perfect score at the Mr. Universe ever. I believe that was in Mexico somewhere.
And speaking of that perfect score, I was doing some research, of course, and I knew this anyways, but I did see it written where he was credited with the only perfect score at 300. But, Danny, we all know that that's not the only perfect 300 you've ever seen. Isn't that right?
You got it. I'm the only guy that scored a perfect score and lost.
That's right. And for anybody who who's heard Danny on our show before knows that was the much talked about '79 Night of the Champions, where he scored a perfect 300 like Mentzer did in the '78 Universe, but lost the show to Robbie Robinson. Certainly good for another show. But my question to you, Danny, is, given that 300 score, what was the buzz surrounding Mike after that Universe and after that perfect score?
Well, see, the Universe was a tough loss for Mike, too, because the reality was this. Mike had flown early to Nimes, France, and Cal Scalak and I we all appeared in New York for this contest. We all had to go in and win your class, and you were so-called on a team. And Mike had got his job done, I did my job, and so did Cal. So Mike had gone with the Weeder Enterprise, and we were stuck in New York. We spent a week sleeping in London, New York, Nimes. We got there like the day before the show, while everybody else was a week before the show. So part of the reason that probably Cal beat Mike was only because of the fact that we were starving at the airport trying to maintain our cool and not eat. So Cal got in better shape than he'd ever been, more cut because of the fact that I kept chasing him around saying you can't eat because you got to compete. So, but again, as Boyer stated, Mike Mentzer had the more complete physique. But for myself, because I used to hang around with Mike, I used to watch him train, I think he realized that it wasn't, you had to do multiple sets. Not a lot, like we did, but he believed in doing, instead of one killer set, maybe 2 killer sets or 3 killer sets before he could finish his physique. And people got to realize that we never got to see the best of Mike because, he quit young. And I remember sitting with him because him and I used to take off to eat the Sizzlers all the time. Back then it was all you could eat, and we'd go toward a salad with a good steak. And he used to say to me, Danny, if I don't reach this goal at this age, I'm out of here. I'm moving forward. He was the guy who would not